美里司令がおっしゃっておられました。この世にはもっと美しいものがあるって。
So I finished Mahoromatic a while ago, and I must say that the ending to the series has been lodged within my mind, not only for how interesting it is on a conceptual level, but also how easy it was for me to personally relate to it. It all starts with episode 13, wherein the lighthearted nature that the show took is completely reversed, and tragedies become numerous. Suguru's grandpa sacrifices himself as a means of finally taking down management. But this is only the beginning. Mahoro and Suguru escape from their hometown in order to keep their friends out of potential danger, because management are after Mahoro. Trapped on this island, Mahoro and Suguru get an opportunity to bond for a brief period of time, but danger feels almost inevitable at this point. Mahoro says one last goodbye to Suguru, who's beyond depressed about this revelation. After all, before Suguru had Mahoro, he was alone. When Mahoro arrived, they had all these great experiences, and she was the one person who promised Suguru that he would not be alone. Mahoro wouldn't leave him. Now faced off against Feldrantz, the formidable android from management, Mahoro feels without a choice. She does the unthinkable. She self-destructs in order to save Suguru as well as the planet from Feldrantz. This imminent danger was always present within the show, but it was always something that I never believed would come to fruition. After all, the show previously was so lighthearted, so heartwarming, so optimistic. It's not that this came out of nowhere, the tragedy was always present. Each episode ends on the number of days Mahoro has left before her destruction. It was hanging over its audience the entire time, but the optimistic nature the show boasted convinced me that it wasn't going to go that route. Not only that, but since most series are 12 or 13 episodes, and a 14 episode count is such an odd number, before the next episode preview, an uninformed viewer may be led to believe that this is the final conclusion of the show, which makes it all the more poignant, and a great relief to realize that there's still more. Thankfully, the show doesn't end on such a devastating note, but the conclusion the show goes with is buoyant, yet also a bit horrifying to think about. In the finale, we see 20 years later, Suguru has completely given up. He's taken aback so much by Mahoro's death that he feels unable to return to Japan, as that would only make him more disheartened. So much so that he doesn't even live on the same planet, instead residing on Silva Planet. He's turned into this bounty hunter, hunting down management androids as a means to get back at Feldrantz, the main reason Mahoro lost her life. We can tell Suguru hasn't forgotten Mahoro at all, even after so long, as he still holds on to her brooch as a reminder of those golden days. He probably hasn't seen his old friends in 20 years, and while he may be very vengeful, I get a sense that most of his friends have moved on. After all, it's later brought up that Minawa has now grown and lived a fairly normal life. So there's this sense that Suguru has fallen behind in a way. This is a feeling I felt personally many times in the past. This idea that a lot of people I once knew are now moving on to bigger and better things while I'm still in one place, unable to move. This episode bathes itself in nostalgia, and it's the same nostalgia that drives Saint to recreate Mahoro. The days with Mahoro around were considered the best, and by having Mahoro return, hypothetically, they would be able to keep moving forward. This leads to what I find so petrifying about the finale, the characters' ages. Suguru has all grown up, yet Mahoro remains the same way she did back 20 years prior. This contrast makes one acknowledge the mortality of the characters in the show even more so than in episode 13. When you think of an episodic comedy or drama set in a high school setting, you always get a sense that the characters experiencing the conflicts don't age. They grow as characters, as individuals, but not physically in any significant way. Even in shows with time skips that focus on teenagers like Nagi no Asukara, the characters still retain that sense of youth. When it comes to Suguru, our main protagonist, that youth is disregarded. He looks completely different, he speaks differently, and in some ways he even acts differently. By having the character change so drastically, it makes me reflect on my very own mortality as well. About the friends I once had that are no more. about the places I once frequented, about the childish ideals I've left behind and the ones I've failed to leave behind. It's scary because the series essentially forces me to face my current self and understand that the older I grow, the more difficult things will become. For Suguru, Mahoro's return ends up being a positive one. He doesn't need to feel the binding effects of nostalgia any longer, because now the golden days are back. The shots showcasing the characters as teenagers in the conclusion isn't literal, but rather a metaphorical return to youthful charm. Unfortunately though, when this conclusion is applied into real-life terms, it becomes even more scary. We as human beings can't just wish these past figures to be back in our lives. So what exactly are we to do? Well, I ultimately believe Mahoromatic asks us to find that person who can make our present just as good as our past. Suguru's nostalgia comes from his experiences with other people, a large group of companions that made each day an adventure and worth looking forward to. The difference, 20 years later, is that he lives his life alone. It's this loneliness that makes him long for the days when he had other people worth depending on. But if all one ever does is act vengeful, then it'd require a miracle for things to get better. Suguru undeniably gets lucky, which is why I find it a very difficult conclusion to swallow. On one hand, Suguru's happy, but on the other hand, had he never ran into Mahoro again, nothing would have changed. Which, from my perspective, only cements this concept that one cannot have this great adulthood if one doesn't open themselves up to others. By running into Mahoro, Suguru is forced to open up, and once he does, he's rewarded. I consider myself to be a nostalgic person. Part of the reason I love indulging in early 2000s anime is because I grew up with that era. But when you're younger, you take all these first experiences for granted. Sure, they're enjoyed, but you aren't too aware or all too thoughtful about how future events may change things in the blink of an eye. Suguru is no different. He lives out those days without giving too much thought on how all that he's once enjoyed could be completely gone. How long Mahoro has left to live, always looming in the shadows, but it was just paid very little heed, both to the audience as I mentioned previously, but also to Suguru. One also isn't dwelling too much on the past either, because living at that moment is so enjoyable. But if, when you grow older, all you are is nostalgic for your childhood, then never can you gain an appreciation for the present times. The only memories you will have of the present in the future is being miserable and trapped in the past. Mahoromatic hones in on the poor effects nostalgia can have on someone if taken to the extreme, and encourages its audience to find worthwhile bonds to ensure more excellent memories in the future. Even with all the show's faults, I can't help but appreciate it for bringing these ideas to my attention, and making me reflect on my own life as a result.